today's May 27th, 2021. We are at the Donnelly House in downtown Mount Dora, and we are talking to John Jackson, who um, has been a long time involved in the citrus industry in Lake County. He was our county agent for I don't know how many years, but he's going to tell us that. And so what I want to do, I want to start out, introduce yourself, tell us when you came to the area, why you came to the area, and we're going to talk a lot about the citrus industry in Mount Dora, things you know about it, things you've read about it, and, and get some of the history about it.
I can do that.
Okay, all right.
You ready to go?
Go for it.
All right. My name is John Jackson. I'm actually a city boy. I was born and raised in Orlando. I went to the University of Florida, and I found out that thermodynamics and statics were more than I could handle. So I left engineering, and I was intrigued with agriculture. So I got a degree in agriculture, got a master's degree in fruit crops. So I was ready for a job, ready to get out and go to work, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And the fighter pilots in the citrus industry are called production managers. They're the guys that make the big decisions about how much to fertilize, when to spray, and all that. And those were the premier jobs. If you couldn't be a fighter pilot, a lot of times there was room for you to be in sales and provide technical support. And just so happened when I was at Gainesville, they were looking for a county agent. That was third on my list. Because didn't know much about what a county agent was, and they wanted me to wait a while as they get the position open, but I couldn't wait. I had a baby on the way. So I took a job in Fort Pierce as an assistant fighter pilot. I was a production manager. The strange thing about it was that I knew nothing about the reality of growing citrus. Having been raised in Orlando, my closest contact with citrus was a grapefruit tree in my neighbor's backyard. And as boys, we climbed that tree, and it was a perfect bomber. You could be the bombardier one day and the pilot one day, and we played in the tree. And I took a job in Fort Pierce, 6.5 days a week. I was up at 5 o'clock, picked up the mechanic, drove to the Grove, closed it up, and everybody left, making $135 a week. The university called and said, "We finally got everything squared away. Would you be interested in coming to Lake County, taking a job as a county agent, working with citrus growers in Lake and Orange County?" I was born in Orlando. This was close to home. Significant pay increase. They offered me $8,600 a year. I was a faculty member of the University of Florida, so I had all the benefits of that. Paid vacation, study leave, all those wonderful things. Back in those days, you could qualify as a USDA employee because the USDA participated in this joint program. So I was a civil service gentleman, so I got civil service retirement, state benefits, and so forth. So in July 1, 1968, a young kid born in Orlando became the county agent for Lake and Orange County, working with citrus growers. And that's my introduction. I talk to growers all the time, and a lot of these guys that grew up in the industry, like you that know what it's like, they develop character on the end of a hoe handle, and they worked in groves. And if you lived in Lake County and you were a young man, you spent some time involved with citrus in one way or the other. I never was able to develop that kind of a character. I was a city boy that rode a bike around town and played in backyards and so forth. But I've learned an awful lot about what it means to be in agriculture and what the commitment that people have. And I'm going to tell you a quick little story. Every year, the county agents or extension agents would do career days. I was over in Leesburg doing a career day, and last period of the day, the students came in and sat down, and a young lady sat up front, looked like she could go to work in First National Bank. Now, my first question always is, what's agriculture? And most of the kids would say it's growing food or this and that. She raised her hand, I called on her, and she never missed a beat. She said, well, agriculture is a way of life. And you know, it kind of took me back, but that's so true. If you've been involved in agriculture and citrus, it's a way of life. And you know, one way you can look at that is I've seen citrus growers go through all kind of adversity, and they still just keep coming back and planting and hanging in there. So it is a way of life, and I've grown accustomed to that. I think I've become a part of it. So it's a fascinating story.
With the history museum, the citrus, the Museum of Citrus, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, recently I've taken on the mission to tell the story of Lake County citrus, and I was involved with the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame for many years. We've become partners with Florida Southern College, and the archives of the citrus industry are located at Florida Southern College. And so part of the mission of the Hall of Fame is not only recognize people that have done significant contributions to the industry, but also to tell the story of citrus. So I'm off on that direction right now, and we're going to do it using crate labels. And if you're not familiar with crate labels, these are the labels that were placed on the end of wooden cartons when they were shipped to market, primarily in auction markets, to identify what was in the container, and buyers got to recognize they knew whose fruit that was and if that guy produced good quality fruit or not. So we're going to have 4-foot by 4-foot aluminum signs all over Lake County that will have crate labels. The Mount Dora sign will have Roxy on one side, Mount Dora Citrus Growers Co-op label on the other side. When you go to the sign, there will be a QR code. You can scan that. I know most people can't do that, but your grandkids can. And it will take you to a website and tell you some background on that particular label. And this way we're going to tell people about citrus in Lake County and have some fun doing it. So hopefully people will get off the couch, drive around, visit, look at the signs, maybe stay in the city. You know, if you haven't been to Mascot and haven't had lunch at the Rainbow Restaurant, you got to get out and do it. You got to come to Mount Dora. You got to see how, and I say this in all kindness, how a redneck town is converted into a tourist attraction. And Mount Dora for years and years, as you know, Ernie, was one of the many redneck citrus towns in Lake County.
Can you tell us about the early days of citrus and you know, when things were planted first, who did it, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, one thing to remember, you know, we're not in an agrarian society like we used to be. But years ago, and not that many years ago, well over half the people in this country fed the other half. So farming was the foundation, and citrus was the foundation of Mount Dora. You go to history books, and there's a lot of information on the social clubs, the buildings, everything else. But the message that I think isn't really strong enough is that all sat on the citrus industry. And let me tell you why that was. Citrus industry in Lake County, the best that we can come up with in 1876, David and Mary Simpson arrived in Mount Dora. And they planted some citrus trees. They had a son that was born 2 years later, James Warren Simpson. They got a 160-acre homestead, probably right where we're sitting, on the east side of Lake Dora. And they were citrus growers. 1894-95, a major freeze came through here and wiped out almost all the citrus. Well, David decided that he had had enough fun, so he got into turpentine and the sawmill business. But James loved citrus. He had a vision, and he said, citrus is the industry, and it's going to be what I'm going to be involved with. And so Jimmy, as he was known, I found out, stayed Lake County, planted some acres. 1900, he bought some equipment, started looking after other people's groves, went to California and brought back budwood. And this could get us in another direction, but basically citrus is a budded crop, and so the top is selected from varieties that you like to eat are good quality. So he had contacts in California because he worked for a nursery for a little while. Brought back, established an industry, got going, built a packing house, had an ice company, city councilman, on the public school board, a mason, a Shriner, a Kiwanian. How do you have time to do all that? So, and there were others like the Sadler family and the Connor family, and all of these were the foundation of Mount Dora. The citrus industry started basically in the late 1800s. Freezes wiped it out, but it came back. And so we had a strong citrus industry in this area, a couple of big packing houses. And let me tell you about packing houses. The citrus packing house was the primary business of a community in Lake County. And the great thing about a citrus packing house was that the season didn't start until after school was in session. And the packing house shut down before school was over. So mom could get the kids settled in school, then she became an employee of the packing house. Most of the employees were involved in grading and packing fruit were ladies, and it was a piecework hand operation. But she could get into work early, pack some fruit, go home when the kids got home from school. Perfect place, second income, and yet the housewife could be a mom and she could be employed. And so packing houses employed those folks. They had people that were obviously bringing the fruit in and packing it and sorting it and unloading trailers and so forth. And then on the other end, all of that fruit had to be picked by hand. So there were folks in the fields picking fruit. And to give you an idea of what kind of a volume we're talking about, a box of Florida oranges contains about 300 pieces of fruit. And Mount Dora Growers was processing a million cartons of fruit a year. So you multiply 1 million times 300, you get a whole lot of pieces of fruit plucked from the tree and run through a packing house.
What the citrus industry did in the 40s.
Well, in the 40s, we had the Depression that came along, and reading some material, the growers were concerned about a number of things. It appears that there were some rather marginal growers and packers that would ship fruit out of the state that really wasn't mature. And the unique thing about citrus is that it matures on the tree. Once you remove a citrus piece of fruit from the tree, it doesn't mature any better. It's as good as it gets then. It will gradually kind of go downhill. Whereas apples and peaches, you pick them and then they mature. So in the late 20s and 30s, they were shipping immature fruit. Growers weren't getting as much money as they thought they should have, and so they formed an association, and packers were members of it, growers were a member. They claimed 10,000 grower members and 66 packer members. And so in the 40s, we were seeing growers struggling with low prices and maintaining standards to ship good quality fruit. The war came along, demand goes up now, and so farming is doing all right. We're taking almost anything we can. One little kind of aside is that the military wanted to have citrus for their soldiers, but they couldn't ship juice overseas, so we came up with a powdered product, the first kind of a process deal, powdered citrus. And I heard that it was so bad that the story went like this. It arrived to the front. Soldiers opened up the container. Oh no, citrus. Okay, here's the deal. I'm going to give you my gun. You hold it on me while I drink it, mix it and drink it. And then I'll take your gun, hold it on you, and force you to mix it up and drink it. So we had a problem. We couldn't get citrus into a container. And one thing you need to understand about Florida citrus is that we have these nice, warm, humid summers, lots of rain, and that does a number of things. First of all, it produces some really fantastic fruit, high in sugar content, good juice. Inside is excellent. It also harbors rust mites, greasy spots, wind scar, all these things that are surface blemishes. So typically a Florida fruit would look a little marginal on the outside, but inside it's great. So in the 40s, we were desperately trying to find an answer of how we can make a good processed product. And fortunately, the University of Florida and U.S. Department of Agricultural scientists developed frozen concentrated orange juice in the mid-40s, 46 and 47. And this product, the secret to it was they didn't take all the water out of it. They left some of the juice that had the flavorings in it. And then as later as the technique improved, they could extract flavors and put it back in there. And so we now have a product that is frozen, and in order to use it, you thaw it out and add water to it. And so frozen concentrated orange juice came on the scene in the late 40s. And so in the early 50s and all through the 50s, there was a huge effort to feed these juice plants. And there are 5 of them in Lake County, one right up the road in Umatilla, one over in Leesburg, one in Howey, one in Groveland, and one in Leesburg. So citrus is off and running now. So in the 40s, we developed concentrate. In the 50s, now we're planting grows everywhere because there's a big demand for juice. And the demand for juice continues on into the 60s and 70s as we feed the plants. And we're making money, we're doing pretty good. The one thing that put fear in the heart of citrus growers is freezes. And so if you look at the history of citrus in Mount Dora, for example, remember we said that David Simpson decided to become a timberman because he saw what happened in 1894 and 95. A freeze in December, and then February the next year wiped out the industry. So then growers come back a freeze in 1899, but they persist. Slowly citrus comes around. It's doing great. We got processed product. The prices kind of stabilized. And then as the growers became more efficient, we started running into issues now of supply and demand and low prices. And the 70s growers in the early part of the 70s were having a price crunch, squeeze, making some money. We had a freeze in 1977. And you were around then, that was a freeze, it snowed. And we had snow all the way down to Miami. Well, it did some damage, but actually that was a good freeze because it brought the price of fruit up. I remember I was here, growers were selling fruit for 25 cents a pound solid. You don't know what that means, but anyway, for 25 cents. After the freeze, the price went up to 85. And at 25, growers were losing money. At 85, they were making some money. And it stayed at a reasonable level there after that freeze. However, in 1962, we had a serious freeze. And this freeze wiped out a lot of the crop. It occurred on December the 13th, 1962. We lost most of the crop that year, and we came in and pruned the trees back heavily. So for a couple of years, we didn't have really good production. Price went up. And in fact, if you were a grower that didn't suffer really extensive damage, you made good money after the freeze because you had fruit when nobody else did. But the interesting thing is that when you prune a plant, citrus being a plant, it's a rejuvenating process. So the severe pruning that took place after the 62 freeze produced a lot of new growth and everything else. And lo and behold, 1966, 67 comes along, and we have the biggest crop ever. It jumped up by 40%. Price goes, supply goes up, price went down. So we suffered a little bit at the end of the 60s as we were back into production. Packing houses were running. Mount Dora Citrus Growers Cooperative, around the corner down here, was one of the larger packing houses in Lake County. I think that I looked at the 71 records, for example. They were the 3rd largest shipper of fresh fruit out of Lake County. Golden Gem was 2nd. Lake Region and Tiberias was 1st, but Mount Dora was next. Mr. Holbert ran the packing house Um, his son Tommy still lives in Tangerine. Packing House employed a couple hundred people. Uh, I think they shipped 1 million cartons of fruit that year, and they were a predominant source. They actually originated in 1920. The original company was Citrus Culture Corporation. You might have seen the sign like that. It evolved into the co-op.
Who were some of the grower families that were involved in outdoor growers?
The Simpsons were, the Sadler family was, they were, the Connors were members of the family, the Edgertons, a lot of names that they're familiar. The Edgerton family was in citrus. They got out of citrus. And by getting out of it, a lot of these families might not have the same burning desire like the Simpsons to stay in business. We're going back, but we had Jimmy Simpson, the patriarch that kept in the citrus business. His son was Howard Simpson. Howard took over the business and ran it. And then there was my contemporary, Howard James Simpson Jr., known as Jim or Jimmy Simpson. And when I came to Lake County, he was one that I would visit regularly. He had the same passion as his grandfather did, and he had the same kind of inclinations. And I'm going to tell you a quick little story. I read about this from Edgerton, about how his dad and Jimmy Simpson decided to irrigate a grove. And the story goes how Edgerton bought a pump from Pennsylvania and had it shipped down here. And the two of them figured on how to get it in the lake and get it all set up at Edgerton's Grove. And Mr. Edgerton said, and his daddy said that he and Jimmy cranked that thing up, and it sounded like a jet engine. But the next thing he knew, there was water coming out of the pipes in the grove. Said those two guys acted like kids. They were so thrilled that they had figured a way to irrigate citrus. So I found that growers kind of have a secret passion. Some of them are entomologists, some of them are fertilizers. But people like Jimmy, old man Simpson, and Jim Simpson were frustrated engineers. They like to tinker with equipment. And I have to tell you a story about Jim Simpson and a mechanical harvester. So this is probably in the 70s. It's costing us a lot of money to pick fruit by hand. And Jim Simpson is highly involved in research because growers were taxing themselves to provide funds to supplement research. And Jim was chairman of a growers committee that administered the tax dollars. So he would spend hours reviewing research grant proposals and everything else. Became really intrigued with one from Dr. Jody Whitney in the research center at Lake Alfred for a mechanical harvesting device that would use huge fans to blow the trees. And you had deflectors that would deflect this huge velocity of air up and down the tree. And as it did, it would pulsate the tree, whip the limbs, and the fruit would pop off. So Jim decided he's going to build a mechanical harvester. And rarely do you find a grower doing something like that. That's something that John Deere does, right? No, Jim was going to build a mechanical harvester. And the way that he did this, he got the plans from Dr. Whitney, and then he went out and found the best craftsmen he could around here. Guys who could weld, guys who could do mechanical work, hydraulic work. And he would have this crowd, and every afternoon, about 5:30, they would gather at his barn up there on Lemon Street. And Jim, being the wise person he was, there was always the cooler of beer, and he had a pad. And these guys would start going, and they would be working. We need 4 U-bolts. We need this, and Jim's writing them down. Next day, Jim's running all over the area getting parts. That afternoon, the crowd comes back. They go. End of the story. Jim has a air harvester that works. He has a rake that picks up the fruit. He has a sprayer to put out the chemical. His dad, Howard, drives the air harvester. And they actually blew fruit off the trees and picked it up. I doubt seriously that it was cost efficient, but I'm pretty sure that harvesters knew that the Simpsons had a machine that could do what they're doing. They were not nearly as likely to try to get a better price for picking it. Jim got his fruit picked at a reasonable price, and he had a monster of a machine there that was fun to operate, and it was a precursor. We now have mechanical harvesters that work. That one never paid for itself, but it was a fascinating story. Even finding somebody that was one of those people that came down and worked on the machine, if somebody could send me and put me in touch with. There was one guy that worked at a local automotive shop that was one of the mechanics, and I went there and they said, yeah, whatever his name was, he retired 5 years ago and we don't know where he is. So I haven't been able to track anybody down that worked on that. I talked to Suzanne Tresh, the Simpsons bookkeeper, for years and years, and she has all the records, and she said, those were all cash employees. We have no records of payrolls for any of those people. They got paid in beer and cash, but most importantly, they got paid in the fun and being involved in that whole effort to create this magnificent piece of equipment.
Didn't they also develop one?
Mr. Baker was also a frustrated mechanic, and they had shakers that they would use to shake the limb and shake the fruit off and harvest it. They didn't invest near the money that the Simpsons did, but they did have a machine that worked, and we used shakers for a while. The pioneer was the George Howard at Winter Garden, and back then we had citrus trees, a lot of them that were 30 feet tall, and it got to the point where you couldn't pick them by hand, and so these machines would go in there and shake the trees that growers refused to prune. The Bakers did that for a while. They had equipment over in Tavares, and they eventually moved away from it, and here again, they could get it picked by hand as cheap as they could get it picked mechanically, but they had the machine and the backup to do it. Bakers came to Central Florida. The father had been farming. At first I thought Long Island, but I think it was probably Pennsylvania. So he'd been farming in Pennsylvania, family farm. They came down here, and it was a family farm. That's what he had known, how he had gone about it. And he bought that beautiful high hill in Tavares across from where the hospital is now, warm location. And he would do things, for example, he had an irrigation system that also could take natural gas, and he thought that he could run natural gas heaters under those trees to protect them from the freeze. I don't know if he ever got one to run or not. I'm not really sure. But Bill Jr., his son, and Bill III would tell me that Dad would get out on the tractor with his tie on. That once a farmer, always a farmer. He loved to get out in the field. Bill Jr. and his son-in-law, Dick Dean, basically ran the groves, and it was a family deal. And they worked so beautifully together. For example, when harvesting came around, Dick would run the forklift that would pick up the boxes of fruit and dump them in the trailer. And Bill was a truck driver, and he would haul them to the juice plant. And the same thing, they shared the grove care, spraying, fertilizing. They had different tasks. Bill Jr., not the dad, but Jr., worked for Lake Region for a few years as a bookkeeper and an accountant in the business department. But he went back with the family farm. And you're right, they were kind of a self-contained entity. And Bill III now is running it. And he's kind of moved in the direction that a lot of people are going now in direct marketing. And so he's partnered with a family in Umatilla. They have a retail outlet, and they squeeze juice and sell vegetables from greenhouses and everything else. So the next generation is learning to survive. Just like the older ones came up with ways, they're doing it. But the Bakers were a fascinating family. Another family in the area that very interesting is the Connor family. And the Connor family were in Ocklawaha originally on the other side of Lake Weir. The Connor family was in the nursery business, and they moved to Lake Jim and established a citrus nursery, and very successful one. They also got groves, had a packing house, and they were a key part involved in the citrus industry. Dorothy Shipes was the daughter. Dorothy was probably one of the early female activists in activist probably isn't the right word, but a leader of the citrus industry. She served on the Florida Citrus Commission, Farm Bureau, and these were not roles that women fulfilled back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s. But Dorothy was a leader there. She was outspoken and had a grasp of things and so forth. And Ocklawaha was a well-known and highly respected nursery and packing facility. Mr. Connor, not related, was well-known grower in the Mount Dora area. Vernon Connor, known as Cap Connor. I'm not sure where he arrived, but he was from up north and came down here, but got involved in citrus. And his main talent was he was a peacemaker and a deal maker. We could have an industry issue that was splitting everybody in half, and Mr. Connor, old Cap, could come in and he could kind of talk to folks and bring them to some common ground. He was a president of Mount Dora Growers for years. He's in the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame. And there are 3 Mount Dora growers and people in the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame. And Vernon Connor, Cap Connor is one. The other one is Jim Simpson, my contemporary, because of all the work that he has done. And the other one is a guy by the name of Jack Norris. Now, Jack Norris, his family was involved with another family in this area called the Blands. And Mr. Bland was a banker. He made his money in banking, but he invested it in agriculture, primarily cattle, but he did have some citrus. And Mr. Norris was a foreman and farm manager for Mr. Bland. Just so happened that Mr. Norris, his brother was Bob Norris, and Bob Norris was the county agent for 35 years in Lake County. But Jack Norris grew up in Mount Dora, went to Mount Dora High School, went to Gainesville, and went to work. Eventually, he went to work with Coca-Cola, and then he went to work with Florida Power. But Jack Norris probably mentored more industry leaders than anybody else. They would come to work, and he was the kind of guy that knew just how much responsibility to give to them and just how much supervision they needed to learn and grow themselves, make a few mistakes, but not disastrous ones, and go through. And so Jack was still lives down on the East Coast. He used to come to our old timers. As a kid, it was a learning experience for me, and my classroom was in the field, and so I'd come to Mount Dora Growers, and the man that ran the grows was Jimmy Cooper. I didn't know Jimmy very well. He left and retired shortly after I got here, but I would interact with him. Kerry Colley was a general manager of Mount Dora Growers for a little while. I think Mr. Hobart retired. Kerry Colley's dad was a doctor in Tavares, but Kerry's nephew went to Gainesville with me, and he lived in Orlando, and he'd tell me I'd come work for Uncle Kerry, in the groves from Orlando. And then Bobby Blair took over the co-op, I think, when Kerry died at a fairly young age. And Bobby ran the co-op, and I would come over and every once in a while, and you learn lessons after the fact. And so Bobby asked me to come over and give a presentation to the board on mechanical harvesting. And this was back when it was just started. The kid was all excited. He was all ready. He had his presentation. He came over, and the board of directors were longtime veteran growers. Basically, I'm a kid. These are old guys. And I'm going to overwhelm them with my knowledge of mechanical harvesting. And I laid it all out about how we use abscission chemicals to loosen the abscission zone and all this stuff. And they endured the presentation. They went through it, wasn't anything they were going to be doing in the next 10 years, probably. They might be around. But when I finished and it was time for lunch, all of a sudden the excitement level increased. What the hell's going on? They all grab their wallets and they whip out their $5 bills or dollar bills, and there was some game he played, like poker, with the serial numbers on the bills. And these guys had a hoot showing their hand, and here they're worth millions, and they were getting all excited about $5, you know. And I was really offended. And then a little bit later, I started thinking, I'm saying, you know, if I was going to talk to them about mechanical harvesting, I really should have just touched very simply on where we were going, but talked about evolution and how critical it was, the role they were playing in the community and all this kind of stuff. But I was overcome with my technical expertise, and it didn't impress the hell out of them. But anyway, but those are the kind of things that, you know, kids need to learn, and they were very polite, and but it was great. But those kind of guys then, before Dorothy and another group came along, they were the ones that guided those organizations, and they were the ones that set policies, and you would see them in the Kiwanis Club, in here, in there. Trust me, if the citrus industry had a bad year, churches had a bad year. If the citrus industry had a bad year, Moon's Hardware had a bad year. And it was, that was the way it was. Things went up and down as the citrus industry went. And, you know, not only do you just have the citrus industry, but we can talk about the allied deals. And Ernie, I forgot the name of the fertilizer plant down. What was the name of the fertilizer plant down on the railroad that was here? Florida Favorite? Was that Florida? It was in Leesburg. I think it was Florida Favorite Fertilizer.
Maybe. I remember Foremost. I think we got ours from Foremost.
Yeah, that was a co-op, and that, but there was a fertilizer plant in Mount Dora, and
that's right. There was. I mean,
it was out there on the railroad tracks,
Yeah.
across from the golf course.
yeah.
So we had a fertilizer plant here, and then we had pardon the language, we had a bastard child arrived in Mount Dora. We talked about frozen concentrated orange juice and how it was a Cinderella product. Well, in Umatilla at the plant, as they would extract the juice, there would be what they call pulp wash. And you would take the pulp from the citrus, run water through it to extract some sugar, and then what was left was pulp wash. And it didn't meet USDA standards to go into the frozen concentrated orange juice. But there were a couple of innovative people that came along and said, heck, we don't have to have it 100% pure juice. We can make a great product out of this. So they started putting up a product in Umatilla. It got to be so popular, they needed their own plant. So they built a place in Mount Dora and produced this nasty old thing called Sunny Delight. Kids loved it. Kids still love it. It took the citrus industry a long time to realize, hey, it doesn't make any difference how you're selling sugar from the fruit. Sell it, man. If you can sell it as Sunny Delight, so what? It doesn't all have to be 100% pure juice. And so Sunny Delight was a booming business in Mount Dora. And even though pure citrus growers looked down their nose at it, it's highly successful, moved a lot of product, reached people, fantastic. So now, I forgot who bought it. Did Stokely buy it? No, Stokely bought it.
P&G.
Yeah, bought it, and it's still there, still in the grocery store. Kids still drink it by the gallon. So, fantastic. The tragic thing about citrus in this area was the freezes of the 80s, which is after your time frame. But everything changed after that, and we've gone through a cycle, and we've got diseases and so forth. But from the very beginning, we would have problems that would attack citrus, and growers would always find a solution. And going back to real early days, we brought some stuff from California. A lot of times you bring pests when you bring plants in, and we finally got importation laws and everything else to greatly reduce that. Although if you go to Miami, you can find every known creature alive within 50 miles of the airport because everything gets loose there, even though they try to capture everything. So we had like Cottony cushion scale that invaded Florida back in the 1800s. And somebody finally went to California and found the Vidalia lady beetle that controls it, brought it here to do it. We've gone through burrowing nematodes, Mediterranean fruit fly, Diprepes root weevil, and just one problem after another. And growers find a way to deal with it. And we had burrowing nematode in Florida, and the USDA came in and dealt with that. You know somebody who was intimately involved in that program, and we've lived with it. Currently, we have a problem called greening, or HLB, which for Wanling Bong, and this is the problem that we have not been able to conquer yet. And it plugs up the pipes in the bark of the tree, and the tree can either die or produce really poor quality fruit. So we're trying to deal with that. But growers have been able to overcome adversity time and time again. We thought that we couldn't live with freezes. Lo and behold, a grower up in Umatilla, Nick Farina, shows us how to use water to protect our trees. We can now deal with cold weather by placing water in the right place. Rather than trying to overhead and break the tree down, we put it under there and save the trunk and the bud union and some scaffold in them. So I'm convinced that growers will eventually, research will find an answer to greening. But unfortunately, this area is a bedroom community, and we will not see the grows returning. The Simpson family has been growing citrus for 140 years, and you wonder how long that can happen with the tremendous pressure that's on for land around here. And they still have grows on 441. They're slowly eating away. You know what it's like to feel the pressure of people wanting to buy citrus and put rooftops on it. And you know, that's all well and good, but I like to remind people, and I try to remind politicians of this years ago, that the best thing that could happen for the economy of this whole area is for us to all go back to citrus. Because when we had citrus groves here, they provided a huge percentage of the ad valorem taxes for the county. Yet there wasn't a citrus tree in Lake County that ever checked a book out from the library. There wasn't ever a Brahma cow that went to school. There was never a vegetable